On today's World Insight, the U.S. presidential transition underway. President-elect Joe Biden's picks for key posts. What do they show about the incoming administration's economic and foreign policy? And finding calm and comfort in the arts in a time of global upheaval. On that, get up close with one of China's top-performing artists, Jin Xing.
I'm lucky enough I have art, dance, and stage helping me overcome so many issues.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei, coming to you from Beijing. The program is live. We begin in the United States, where a transition of power is underway. On Tuesday, President-elect Joe Biden had his first top-level President's Daily Briefing. This marks a significant step in the transition, which formally began last week. Mr. Biden has named his picks for several key cabinet posts on economic and foreign policy. Before we get down to a discussion with some of the people in the know, here's a closer look at the President-elect's inner circle.
With 50 days to inauguration, Mr. Biden announces picks to key posts. Former Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen was named Treasury Secretary nominee. Neera Tanden, who leads a liberal Washington think tank, was chosen to lead the Office of Management and Budget. As one of the first picks announced by Biden, the post of Secretary of State went to Obama-era official and longtime Biden advisor Tony Blinken. Jake Sullivan, who took part in the Iran nuclear deal negotiations, will be Biden's national security advisor. Linda Thomas Greenfield was named the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Cuban-born Alejandro Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Deputy Secretary during the Obama administration, was nominated to lead the department. Avril Haines, a former top CIA official, was chosen to be the Director of National Intelligence. Obama's former Secretary of State John Kerry, a champion of the Paris Climate Agreement, has been tapped to serve as Biden's climate envoy. If confirmed, many of the positions will be held by women and ethnic minorities for the first time. The president-elect is keen on delivering on his promise to be a president for all Americans and build a cabinet that reflects this diversity. Mr. Biden has said his national security and foreign policy teams would reboot ties with traditional allies and reimagine American foreign policy and restore moral leadership.
Together, these public servants will restore America globally, its global leadership, and its moral leadership, and will ensure that our service members, diplomats, and intelligence professionals can do their job free of politics.
Although Mr. Biden still faces challenges in resetting global ties and restoring norms that shifted under Trump, he has committed to reversing several controversial foreign policy decisions, including promising to return the U.S. to the Paris Climate Accord, the World Health Organization, and open a pathway to negotiations with Iran and Syria. The incoming U.S. president's nominations will still face a confirmation process that is expected to be bitterly polarized.
On the latest with the incoming administration with President-elect Joe Biden. For more, joining us in Washington, D.C., Todd Belt, Professor and Political Management Program Director at George Washington University. In Washington, D.C., Brendan Andrews, entrepreneur and former Hill staffer. In Shanghai, China, Shanding Li, Professor with the Institute of International Studies, Fudan University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Finally, the first briefing for a president-elect. What have you heard, Mr. Belt? Whether in the Beltway, everything good?
It certainly seems that way. We've moved past the impasse that we had with the release of documentation as well as resources for Biden to really fully start his transition, and this is what he needs. He needs to be able to get those documents and those in-person briefings with people from the administration so that he can know exactly what the Trump administration is doing, what government is doing, so that he can put his stamp on it and he can change things that he wants to change and actually know where the threats are around the world, where our forces are around the world, and what he needs to be able to do once he takes office on the 20th of January.
Mr. Andrews, how do you see his critical picks of foreign policy and also economic policy?
Yeah, I think the picks that Biden has made so far really show him making drawing a line of demarcation between Trump and the Biden administration moving forward. I think up and down the nominations you see people that have served, a lot of them under President Obama, but also folks that are going to take the nation, especially in an international relations sense, in a different direction. And I think you also see Biden trusting black women. Black women were critical to his primary victory in South Carolina with 60% support.
Yeah.
91% of black women voted for him in the election in November, and now you see Linda Thomas Greenfield leading as the nominee for ambassador to the United Nations. And this will really be a primary thrust for Biden's foreign policy, because her international relationships as a career foreign service officer are going to be critical in rebuilding some of these multinational agreements. And then also when it comes to China, she will be a primary focal point in building on that U.S.-China relationship in terms of UN reform. There was, of course, some controversy around the IP chief earlier this year. So, yeah.
So we heard from President-elect Biden, it's about restore America leadership. To what extent will he be able to do it politically, Mr. Belt, Professor?
Well, that's certainly the real big challenge. He needs to bring America back together again in terms of Republicans and Democrats at home, as well as rebuilding the foreign service establishment. I mean, you really look at the State Department and intelligence, and they've lost a lot of people over the past few years, and there were a lot of positions that just weren't filled. There's a lot that really needs to be done to just get the Biden administration up and running on foreign policy and to know what's going on. But I do agree that it's going to be a much more multilateral approach. I think that the president-elect will look to have a democracy summit, as he has been saying, and I believe he'll probably go to Europe within the first 100 days to try to rebuild some of those relationships with the European Union and NATO that have really been strained under the Trump administration.
Professor Shen, you've been listening to your American colleagues now. We've seen some interesting phenomena with American politics, and therefore the U.S. approach to the rest of the world. Things are changing every 4 years. You're on one program, and then you're off, and then you're on again. And therefore, people are really, I don't know which adjective to use, how to describe the situation and how to adjust to this situation. Do you think a change of leadership will really mean the trust will come back for the U.S.?
Well, I think whichever is the U.S. administration, the chief purpose is to maintain Americans' global power, global respect to America, and Americans' ability to lead. For this, there is no difference between Trump and Biden or Obama and George W. Bush. But the approach, the way they handle various challenges could be quite different. And this time, I think Mr. Biden would more or less use Obama way to present America's moral image, to give American resources for the world to tap in order to manage those global challenges for global governance. So America is willing to give rather than what Trump has done, unwilling to give but to take from other partners. So this is quite different. But Biden is not Obama. He may do something similar to Obama, but something else which could be different. And Obama has no dialogue with North Korea, but Biden may want to do something.
Well, may want to do something.
Trump is unwilling to talk to Iran.
Go ahead, sir. Sorry.
With North Korea, DPRK. Because Trump initially said fury and fire. He was unwilling to talk to North Korea. He said all options are on the table, which means he has a military option.
Okay.
America always has a military option, but it's unnecessary to speak out. But Biden may want to do something to have some engagement. Trump, after all, has had 3 personal meetings with Kim Jong-un. So I think he would try to be himself, not Obama the third or Trump the second.
Well, that's probably about his personal legacy, but what we care more about in the rest of the world is where America is heading for. Now, Mr. Trump coming into the office later in January, hopefully, is not necessarily the same as when Mr. Obama stepped into his office, because there are already 4 years very different in the United States, and we see that it's further divided as we speak. Politically, for example, Professor Belt, Mr. Biden's hands could be tied, even though he could always use a presidential order, executive order, in other words. But to what extent do you think he will be able to extend the branches, olive branches, on some of the issues that he now is talking about? But to what extent will he be able to do it when he's in the office, Mr. Belt?
Well, I mean, that is going to take quite a bit of a reset. The way that we saw Barack Obama when he went to Cairo in 2009 and talked about resetting relations with the Middle East. There can be some symbolic things that he can do. We don't have the travel ban anymore, but he can disavow the Muslim travel ban that Donald Trump had. And he can signal in other ways and hold meetings right away with foreign leaders in a multilateral way that will say to them, we are not going to be transactional anymore. This is not a Donald Trump administration where all he cared about was selling weapons and bringing jobs and looking good internationally and having people say nice things about him, but that we're here to work. And I think that one of the big challenges that we have out there right now is coronavirus, and there's an opportunity to work internationally to try to solve this and to prepare for the next eventuality of another outbreak after this that the scientists tell us we may have.
Talking about coronavirus, Mr. Belt, we did notice that Mr. Biden has yet to announce some of the most important posts that are related to public health issues. So this is very interesting, isn't it? At a time when this is the top priority, he didn't say much about it in terms of people he's likely to choose.
Well, I think that there's a lag there with the information. I mean, this has been one of the things in the transition that the Biden-elect administration, the transition team has been looking forward to finding out exactly what is going on. What does the Center for Disease Control know? What are the data that we have internationally? So I think he needs to get the data first before he can really put the right people in charge to handle the task.
On the other hand, Mr. Andrews, since you're an entrepreneur and you've been talking about economic issues, we have seen difficulties to have the relief package coming out with the political divide right now in Washington. Now, that's likely to continue if the pandemic situation ever worsened. So how do you see the current peaks of future Biden administration be able to overcome political hurdles and try to implement what they preach?
Yeah, you've got Chris Coons in the United States Senate, who has always been described as someone in Biden's inner circle working diligently on some kind of pandemic relief. Nancy Pelosi and Democrats on the House side have passed several relief packages, but they just haven't moved forward in the Senate with President Trump in the White House and with Mitch McConnell as the Republican leader. I think these things are going to come to a head. I think when you look at consumer spending, we just had Black Friday in the United States and Cyber Monday, and of course we'll have Christmas shopping going on throughout the end of the year. That may give people some false hope in terms of where the economy actually is. Yes, people are spending. Yes, people want to get away from this pandemic and enjoy the holidays, but some of those fundamentals of the economy, when you talk about small businesses, in their funding, hiring or lack thereof, and the durability of the economy if there is some kind of shutdown that happens because of the pandemic in the next couple of months. I think Biden will have a very serious economic issue on his hands, and it may take that to actually bridge the divide between the Senate and the House because the pandemic issue when it comes to small business has been dire for many months. However, that hasn't yet been enough to get Republicans and Democrats on the same page in Congress to pass legislation.
Those are only issues already everybody's paying attention to. What about China-U.S. relations? Professor Shen, you've been doing research about that for decades now. Of course, over the past few years, turbulent times that probably none of us have experienced before. But looking ahead, is there going to be some real logic change in terms of how the possible Biden administration going to approach China? And how is China preparing for all options? What is likely to be the nature, Professor?
Ambassador Twittenke used to say he regrets that at this time there is zero dialogue between the two countries. I think with Mr. Biden's becoming the next U.S. president, this situation would improve. At least Beijing and Washington could partner on how to improve the global climate change, and China-U.S. can cooperate. As the U.S. is going to return, Biden promised that he would bring the U.S. back to the Paris Climate Accord first day when he becomes the president. And he would bring America back to WHO. China has no objection for America to do so. The U.S. could give lots of resources for WHO to work with all member countries, especially for those countries in Africa, in India, where they are suffering from the severe pandemic trouble. So China-U.S. can work together, partner. China has its own vaccine, U.S. its vaccine, each has its own merit. And China-U.S. can end the past few months where when the two countries were competing in an unhealthy way. So pandemic, climate change, North Korea, and JCPOA, I think all this China-U.S. will soon start to have some partnership and cooperation. But I don't think China-U.S. are going to restore all what Obama and China used to do. So that may not be something that Biden wants to do immediately, or he will be able to do. And on human rights, on South China Sea, and on the trade dispute, he would work with China, but he may have his own style, his own trademarks. He would show his own principle, and for this he may be better in a position to partner with the Congress. In the past, the Congress was more tough. And Trump was saying there was some chaos in Hong Kong, indicating that the Hong Kong authority has some legitimacy in handling the chaos. But Biden may see the things differently. So we will see. But in a larger calculation, China-U.S. are going to reset a part of the better relationship pretty soon.
Is Professor Shen too optimistic? Professor Belt from Washington, D.C. Earlier we saw China-U.S. have 140 dialogues. Then during certain years of one administration it shrunk to 4, and then to 2, and then to 1, and then to 0. So how far can we expect the gradual recovery of these dialogue mechanisms?
Right. Well, it's not going to happen overnight. That's for sure. Of course, we know that the Biden administration needs to put people in place in the diplomatic corps, and that can take up to a year to start to fill those positions out. And these are people that he's going to want to get in there who do have some relationships with people on the other side of the bargaining table for him. So that will take some time. Biden's also going to look at some of the such as the the tariffs in the United States. Joe Biden has always said that he's a friend to the American worker, but these tariffs have hurt American workers. This could be used as a bargaining chip, or it could be used as something where Joe Biden could use it as a measure of good faith and get rid of those tariffs right away. And I hate to repeat myself, but there's a real big challenge, which is, of course, also an opportunity to work together on vaccine production, distribution, and preparations for future public health emergencies. And so there are ways to work together. Of course, China has just
about that,
concluded
Professor,
its own,
if I could just jump
yes.
in, you talk about cooperation in terms of vaccines and also
Sure.
public health issues. Absolutely, that should be everybody working on together. If you look at China has already joined the COVAX, which is a platform trying to manufacture, distribute, and also provide funding for vaccine distribution worldwide. Will the U.S., the Biden administration, for example, be able to join at this critical moment? And the U.S., for example, Pfizer will be able to produce huge amount of vaccines over the year, the 1 year, 2021. Will that be shared with the rest of the world? How do you see the Biden administration will make its decision?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't know. I think the Biden transition team is just getting that information right now about what they know from the Trump administration. So I think it's a little bit early to make those projections. But certainly, scientific information can be shared, right? And then production can be done independently by both countries, and distribution can be made.
Today we have already here Professor Shen coming out of Wall Street Journal reports suggesting the teams and scientists in U.S. CDC have been looking into the virus, and it's not a debate about the origins of the virus, but rather to continue to discover, to trace back as early as possible where the virus might be spreading around all over the world, and be able to find as close as possible to its origin, which of course is the animal jumping to human being. So Professor Shen, do you see there is atmosphere for China and the U.S. despite of the early dirty fight in terms of quote-unquote China virus? Some even politicians talking about this unfair phrase. Be able to come back to cooperate on research in this field, on scientific research, on technological development even, which is quite a field of fight between China and the United States, the second stage of China-U.S. trade war. Professor.
The two countries used to work together on those issues, especially handling Ebola, how to contain them from spreading from Africa. And this time they suspect each other and they blame each other. But as Biden has stated, he is going to bring the U.S. back to WHO. First, he would bring the U.S. back to Paris Climate Change Accord and WHO. And of course, it will take some time for U.S. to do it. But the indicator is clear. U.S. want to be a part of the global effort, not U.S. One-on-one, unilateralism. U.S. India, U.S. Myanmar, U.S. want to do U.S. global. And as China is a part of this system already. So it's very difficult for U.S. not to work with China. But China and the U.S. can work together in a good approach. And China can talk to U.S. where we can share information. And for the WHO expert group visiting China to have those inspection, tracing the origin of the virus, how they spread, China may welcome U.S. scientists to be a part of the WHO group. And when the WHO group would send a delegation to the U.S., U.S. may welcome WHO to bring Chinese scientists to be a part of the visitation group. This would help build trust, rather than China welcome WHO but no U.S. citizen. And the U.S. would welcome WHO but no Chinese citizen.
I got your point.
I think at this time, these two countries should be more open. Welcomes them to be a part of global scientist group, not one nation's group.
Okay.
If the two countries can be more open, more genuine, I think they are going to improve their already very bad relationship.
The good news, of course, is Mr. Blinken, who of course has been nominated as the possible Secretary of State, is a believer in multilateralism. He served in the UN and he has been visiting China. He knows people here. He's been having extended discussions with them. We hope those could be helpful for him and also his team to extend and also start operate their work. Particularly China-U.S. relations. Having said that, though, another issue about trade, Mr. Andrews, I'm going to the heart of your concern, trade and economic issues. Now, it's not just within the U.S., but also how U.S. is handling with the rest of the world. Well, there is 4 years of unilateralism. Asia already taken its lead. Japan, for example, taking the lead into CPTPP. Meanwhile, ASEAN, playing ASEAN centrality, already been reaching agreement with China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand on RCEP in such a difficult year. So is the U.S. still have leadership in trade, still have leadership on economic recovery? Many have a big question mark. Your take.
So yes, the U.S. is still a global leader when it comes to economic issues, and I think you'll see President-elect Biden move forward very quickly to fill that gap that was left by the Trump administration, whether it's the moving from the phase 1 to the phase 2 deal between U.S. and China bilaterally, or looking at some of these other multinational trade agreements, and simply, for example, again, going back to Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield at the UN, moving on from this America First rhetoric to a let's cooperate and work together as a first step in the process. And I think this is going to be one of the areas where President-elect Biden will want to distinguish himself significantly from what we've seen in the Trump administration. Now, that doesn't mean that the Biden administration won't be a tough negotiator. I think when you look at phase 1 and are the U.S. and China meeting the goals in terms of purchased goods? We go to intellectual property protection. We talked about innovation a second ago, but it's hard to work together and innovate if you can't protect IP. When it comes to even climate goals, as they're connected to growing how crops are grown and where they're produced and distributed, Biden will continue to be a tough negotiator, but you'll see him lean forward pretty significantly to try to get some deals done, and at minimum put the rhetoric out there that that the U.S. is open for business with the world. Right.
Very interesting things to talk about the intellectual protection. China recently just had a huge conference regarding that at the very top level about intellectual property right protection. It seems that everybody is working toward the same goal. We hope that will also happen after January the 20th. Thank you so much, the three of you, Todd Belt, Brandon Andrews, Shen Ding Li. Really appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen.